Hello everybody, today we are going to look at the difference between actions and functions. A very important concept you have to have clearly in your mind when you design applications, because understanding the logic of each one and how they behave and execute will help you design the proper architecture for your application. When you log into the community for the first time, you have a samples folder here. And there are a few applications, and one of them is called using action versus function. It's a very simple application that helps you understand that concept. So you could look at it, you could read the documentation. So this tutorial is going to be about the explanation of this sample application. So the action application is running here on the right. The function application here is running in a different tab here on this mobile device. And we're going to look at how each one behaves. So an action is controlled by a control flow. If I drop an action here and I want to create my custom action and I open it, we see that there's a control flow. That's the one that controls the execution of the action. If I add more parameters, let's say here in input, I would add, let's say, a string A and another one, and name it B. And we go back to this. When we call this action, it's triggered by the control flow and returns when everything has executed inside it. So this concept is explained also in the Learn the Basics, right? So if you open the Learn the Basics, when you're in the action or function editor, you have the action versus function and also how to test them. So you can read that. Without reading it, I'm going to explain it. Okay, if there were output parameters, let's say I would name that output, the contract of an action when you call it is that the output control flow is called only when all the outputs are valid. While on the other hand, you could execute an action even if the inputs are not ready yet. Okay, so that's a very important concept. That's the trigger. And when this is called on the output, that means it's executed. On the other hand, if I create a function here, and I open it, we see that there is no control flow. So if I add an input here, and I call it A and B, a function will be executed only when all the inputs are defined. So if this is not defined, but only A is defined, it will not execute. So you see there is a difference in the logic between the two. So we're going to see that in action to make it even clearer. So I'm going to delete my dummy action here and my dummy function. So here we have the action running already, which I executed here with a usual drop down. What is this going to do? It's going to compute my longitude and display it on the screen, but only when I decide it. So I'm going to trigger this action on demand. And you see, it's ready, longitude. Now, something interesting to note is that the longitude, how do we get that? It's not black magic. There is either a GPS on your phone or an IP address, and it's going to be investigated to compute your longitude. So this takes time. Here I'm going to load my application in the browser and press right away on the trigger action. So if we understand the logic, when I press the button, the longitude should not be ready yet. It's going to take like a few seconds for the electronics and hardware and software in the background to return it. But it's going to be returned only when the information is ready. So I press it. Here it's loading the app, and I press the button. and you see nothing happens. Oh, and now it appears on the screen. So we see this delay, and we are going to understand why there is that delay when we look at the implementation. I triggered the action at a specific moment in time, but it returned the information only when the information was ready. Okay? So the following sequence of actions is when it's ready, it displays an alert box to tell me that the longitude is ready. So let's look at the logic. If I go to my action, also we saw the image comes later because I think the image has a high resolution and it took like a second to load, but that's not the point of the demo today. It's just to explain what we just saw. And if I go to my button here and I look at the event, what's happening? Well, it calls an action, so a custom action in this case, fetch longitude. Okay, let's go inside it. Double click on the brick. Let's resize the marketplace. So we have more room to look into this. So what's happening? Oh, there's tons of information. Okay, great. So that single action displays eventually the alert box when everything is ready. So it's not the ideal design. APIs should avoid, having UI dependency, but it's to make a point and understand what's going on, right? UI should be, called from the UI and not from an API. Right? It could be considered a bad design, but that's the way it is for this demo and this sample. Okay, so what do we have? We have the get geolocation function in this case, right? This function is called whenever the app is instantiated. So more details about functions when we look at the function app. So here we even have some documentation, can return longitude, latitude, and altitude even. So if you're on an actual GPS, you can have the altitude. I'm just interested in the longitude. Because that brick can take time to execute, I want to check its value. So once the value is defined, then I generate a control flow. A control flow to execute the action sequence. So this brick is called and triggered by the control flow. There's no input. It asks to generate a longitude and return it to the end user and display it in an alert box. So we have that brick to combine events. So this output is called only when the two are defined. Again, there's some help here. Dispatches a control flow whenever one of the two gets triggered, after they both have been triggered at least once. Here it's the first execution, so they need to both have been triggered once. Okay, so I call this. This hasn't been triggered already. When the value is ready, it gets into this and it tells this box, okay, great, you can continue. Here I generate a string for the user and end user message. So it has a format, it has some concatenation. Great. And when that string information is ready, then I show the alert box. So the alert box is also an action. It's triggered by the control flow. So it has a title and OK button, and then it exits. So what's going on? When is this dialog going to be displayed? It's going to be displayed when those two events have been defined or triggered. One of them is my click. So great, I click the button. But this one is still executing in the background, trying to look for the longitude. And this one blocks its execution. It blocks the control flow from telling this one I'm ready. So I click the button, this one's still working. This one is waiting. Okay, I have the value, boom, I'm ready. I display the value on the screen. So that's why when we load the app and press the button right away, it waits for the function to execute and fetch the longitude, and when everything's ready, it displays the alert box. So it shows that this is an action, but the action only executes when the control flow has been triggered, even if the values are already inside. This is going to be the trigger of the execution. So we have we have a flow that is sequential, right? Nothing executes in a flow if the previous step hasn't been executed. So what happens if I click again on the button? Once a function has been executed, and there's nothing that changes its output value, so I haven't moved, my longitude is still the same. So in the memory of that brick, the longitude, the information is still there. So it's ready, I don't have to recompute it. So if I press on my button again, the on value is ready, this one is ready, nothing has changed, and it tells me, okay, click, yes, I'm ready, I have the information, execute the show dialog instantaneously. And so if I try it and I press it, instantaneously I have the longitude, which is the same here on my mobile application. Okay, so that's for the actions. Let's go back to my app. Now we are going to look at the logic for the function. So as we saw already, a function executes only when its inputs are all defined. No control flow in this case. So here there is a simple app with a source text, and if I type into that source text, there's this function. We see that in real time the data is replicated in the target field. Okay, so let's look at the logic. If I double click on my app here, generally speaking, in most languages and platforms, I would say, you would be tempted to monitor the on-change event of a field like this and take some action. So either my text push it to the target, or my text from the text field copy it to some string, data type, or instance in memory, and the target would be listening to the changes of that text and copy it into the destination. Okay, so let's do that. Oh wait, there is no on-change being monitored, and for the target there is nothing is being monitored. So yeah, how is this happening? Okay, so now we are going to look at how it's happening, right? Here there is a label, and I'm going to show you a design that's not recommended, but it's to make a point, right? So the label has an on-click message that we never handle because we never clicked on that label, but it has an implementation. And that implementation is super simple. First, what do we see? That the control flow is not plugged into anything. So if I clicked on that, nothing would be executed because we would end up here and nothing is connected. But it has what instead? It has two functions. So something very important to note and to know about a function is, as soon as a function is defined, it's instantiated into the memory of the application when it loads. So if I refresh my app here, it's going to instantiate all the function it finds inside the code wherever they are. So here we are in some on-click event of a label, but the app knows, Olympe knows it has some functions hidden inside, so it's going to instantiate them. Those two will be instantiated. So normally you shouldn't put that in an on-click, you should put that, let's say, in the home screen on load. It has more logic, right? But it's to make a point, as I said earlier. So let's go back to my on-click. So those were instantiated. And now they are going to execute only when the input field changes, right? So get UI property gets the property of a label. And if I type in something, test, this executes and returns a value. And this one in turns, feed UI property, is monitoring the input. You see, it's a function. It's different from the set UI property. So here if I, let's say, drop the target, you would say value and you say set value, and it's different from this one. This is an action, so you set the property only when you want to. Here you feed the property, so you set the UI only when the value is ready. So no need to have some trigger, some control flow. Everything works. So I could remove those, and let's say I'm going to do it. I'm going to reset and prove that it's not working anymore. But because that design sucks in terms of pure software development logic, we are going to re-implement it in the onload. And in the onload, we are going to look at the source, the value, get value, but here we need to implement it manually and fetch it here through the target and say get value, yes, and plug it in. And you see it's directed instantaneously because this one has the value already, which is the one I typed, and as soon as I connect it in the target, you know, it means that in the memory of the application there is the value here on the screen, and when I connect it, it acts instantaneously. And if I continue typing, so you see no even no nothing. It's just to show the point of the function execution and logic. Okay, so that's pretty much it. You know, play with it and really think about your design. So we have a known usability limitation here due to the fact that if you drop something, you only have a way to set and get values to actions. We don't have a feed, so as you saw, you would have to feed properties manually by finding the bricks here in the marketplace and dropping it here and have a few more clicks. But very important concept. So sometimes you might see in UIs you need buttons to say a refresh. Here you can implement an entire logic and have the UI refresh instantaneously only when the values are ready. Very important concept. So I hope this is useful to you, and have a nice day.